In the face of the We Charity scandal comes word that the federal government will not explain the process for awarding the $912 million contract. To talk more about this is political reporter Brian Lilley. Brian joins me from Toronto. Brian, the Liberals said they were being open and transparent?
Yeah, well, that's what they claim, and this is a buzz phrase that they've loved to use since they were running for office in 2015. After they took office in 2015, they've always said we're open and transparent. We're the most open and transparent. Yeah, governments like to say this. Oh, when they're in opposition, they love to say it. When they're new governments, they love to say it. Look, each government is successively less open than the previous one, and the Trudeau Liberals are no exception. And so when the We fiasco that's unfolding, where they awarded a $912 million sole source contract to friends of the Prime Minister. In the case of Mark and Craig Kielburger, the founders of who still run the organization, you would expect that the government would say, okay, well, here's the contract. No, they have rejected claims by the media, by the opposition, to do so. So, at Commons Committee this week, Peter Julian, New Democrat MP, put forward a motion calling for the contract, any communications related to the contract, and more to be tabled with the House of Commons no later than August the 8th. It passed unanimously, so that's going to come forward. Now, they can hold back some information. They can do redactions, but the motion says that can't be done by the Prime Minister's office. It has to be done by the law clerk and the House of Commons staff, not political staff. We'll see if they go through with that. We'll find out much more than the government ever wanted us to.
Now, since the We Charity story broke, there have been lots of allegations directed towards the group from disgruntled former staffers, Brian, claiming they now work with organizations that use child labor.
There have been all kinds of allegations, and the organization hasn't done a good job of responding to media questions at all. I put in queries about their real estate holdings because I looked at their financials, and I noticed that between 2013 and the end of August 2019, they went from $11.9 million in fixed assets that they held to $43.7 million in land and buildings in Canada alone. So I asked them basic questions like, how did you amass so much real estate? Did donors know that money was being used for this? Things of that nature. I heard back not from a PR staff member, but from their defamation lawyer.
Wow.
And I can tell you in 20 years, I've never received a response to a media inquiry from a defamation lawyer, never mind an in-house counsel that wasn't an attempt to shut down a story. So yeah, there have been allegations that they work, or media stories that they work with child organizations, companies that use child labor. Not that they do, but they've partnered with them. That's been one allegation. There have been former staffers who are people of color who have come forward and said they were not treated properly. Just on Tuesday, a young gay man came forward and said he was treated improperly. He wasn't given respect. All of these things that, if true, and we don't know yet, these are simply allegations, they don't match the brand put forward by the Kielburgers or we. So this is going to be all very difficult and very uncomfortable. This one contract, and they've received a lot of sole source contracts from this Trudeau government. This one contract has led to a bunch of questions that may finally shine a light on an organization that has been able to get away with doing whatever they want, good or bad, for a long time now.
Brian, our country's parliamentary budget officer says if Canada goes to a basic income for 6 months after the emergency response benefit expires, it could cost us up to $100 billion. You thought we were in debt before.
Yeah, well, don't exaggerate, Hal. It's not $100 billion, it's just $98 billion. I mean, so almost 100, and that's only for half a year. So, there have been people calling saying, well, we just need to a basic income. The pandemic proves that this is what we need to move towards. There's long been a call for this. Pierre Trudeau experimented with it in a small town in Manitoba back in the 70s. It got shelved by the Trudeau Liberals back then. The Wynne Liberals in Ontario had brought in a basic income, and the Ford Conservatives, when they got in power, they scrapped it, saying it's going to cost $17 billion or more, and it's just too much money. We don't have it. People said, oh, how can you claim it'll cost so much? If it was a basic income for Ontario, Ontario's 40% of the country's population. So for 6 months, it would be $40 billion, according to the PBO. That's just for 6 months. This move, there's going to be a lot of political pressure on the Trudeau Liberals to bring this in permanently. This shows how expensive and dangerous it would be.
Wouldn't this basic income also deter people from returning to work?
It absolutely would, because some people may get more money on it than they would working part-time. And look, you need part-time workers, you need full-time workers in all types of industries. I remember covering a story on the Ontario basic income when it was in place, and a man who had been working for one of the big banks for several years. And maybe he thought it was a dead-end job, but I know the big banks, and there are opportunities to move up. He'd spent 5 to 7 years with this bank and quit his job, full-time job, to go on the basic income and design graphics for people for free, or in for yoga lessons and breathing exercises. And these weren't things I was making up. This is what he was bragging about. So yes, of course, it will deter people from working, which is one of the many reasons that it has never really been implemented in a big way in Western society.
Canadians sneering at our brothers and sisters south of the border may want to rethink their sneering tactics. According to a new international poll, Americans, more than Canadians, Brian, are more likely to wear masks during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and Canada is at the bottom of the pack. This is a YouGov poll. YouGov is a major British polling firm. And, you want to know who's going to win the British election? They're one of the firms you go to. They've got Ipsos like we have, but YouGov is one of their organizations. They did a poll, 29 different countries. We're only above 6 of those countries when it comes to wearing a mask. 58% of Canadians said in the middle of June, yes, I'm wearing a mask regularly when I go out. 71% of Americans said they were wearing a mask. So, it's bizarre the way that we in this country, whether it's, as individuals or as our media, try to look at how America's doing. We only compare ourselves to that. America's doing better than many other parts of the world, or has done. Parts like New York have done horribly compared to other parts of the world. But we just look at America and we say, well, we're better than them. Not always. Watch your smugness.
What's interesting is the fact that the Alberta government announced 20 million more masks will be dished out, given to a lot of the fast food restaurants, A&W, McDonald's. You can actually go in and order a 4-pack of masks with your fries. So it remains to see what's going to happen here. But let's talk about Ontario, what's happening there. A lot of Ontario's population today, masks will become mandatory to be worn indoors. Bylaws passed, Toronto and Ottawa?
Yeah, so it's Toronto, Mississauga, the big city next door, Brampton, the whole region of Peel, so going west towards Burlington, Ottawa, Cornwall, the rest of rural Eastern Ontario, they, as of Tuesday at 12:01, so from Tuesday on, have to wear masks in indoor public settings. Now, Hal, I'm not opposed to wearing a mask. I've been carrying one with me for weeks now. I put it on when I need it. If I'm in enclosed spaces and can't social distance, I'll pull out the mask, I'll throw it on. But what bugs me is that these are the same people who, when this really would have helped in March or April, were telling us not to wear masks. We're down to, we're not, ahead of the game like Alberta is, but most of our major hospitals in Toronto, no people in ICU for COVID-19. On Monday, 0 deaths reported in the province of Ontario. The numbers are falling everywhere, and now suddenly in the middle of July, we're told, well, now you got to wear a mask. Why not in April or March when cases were really high? To me, this is just going to the politicization of science, and it's doing it for political reasons. And I think, I wonder, are people going to trust the authorities next time when they've received so many mixed messages during this pandemic?
So many people, young people I know today, Brian, have downloaded the TikTok app, and they're dancing out in the streets, putting it on the social media platform. Now, the US, India, and other countries have warned against this Chinese-based social media platform over security concerns. How about our country's Public Safety Minister, Bill Blair? Will Canada issue a similar warning?
No, he's not going to. Now, I didn't get TikTok. Maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's that I view social media as something for work. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. If there's a way for me to harness social media for my work, then I'm on there. But I looked at TikTok, went, there's no way for me to use this for work. I'm busy enough as it is. I didn't realize that this is backed by a Chinese company close to the government in Beijing. And for a while now, I only noticed it when India announced that they're blocking TikTok in India, and that they claim there are security concerns. Of course, India and China having a bit of a Cold War, a bit of a shooting war, but also a Cold War along their border. So you have to consider that. But then I started looking, and the United States and others have said there are security concerns about TikTok stealing your data. So if you're on a corporate phone and you've got TikTok, who knows what secrets they're going to be pulling out of there. I'm glad I didn't get on it. If your kids are on it, maybe you want to start looking at the privacy settings.
China's technology giant Huawei has been in the news quite a bit as we continue to discuss the extradition of one of their executives, Meng Wanzhou, to the United States. Brian, American business giant Bloomberg says Huawei's rise was at the expense of one-time Canadian telecommunications giant Nortel.
This has been looked at by Canadian media in the past, Hal. I think National Post did an extensive series on it, but for the American media giant Bloomberg to jump in, and this was a big takeout piece and Bloomberg's a major wire service. It's read in, throughout the business community in ways that Canadian media aren't. This goes international, and they did a deep dive into this and said, yeah, it looks like they're, the hacks that took down Nortel, and those hacks have been talked about extensively, that may have benefited Huawei. And in a couple of ways. Concerns that some of the data stolen was eventually handed over to Huawei, but also it helped bring down the company. I'll tell you how extensive the spying from China was on Nortel. When their main campus in Ottawa, they were based out of Brampton outside of Toronto, they had a huge research and development campus in the west end of Ottawa. And eventually that was taken over by National Defense after Nortel went bust. It was big enough for our military to move in there as their sole headquarters. Wow. They had to debug the place, and they found so many bugs. So the fall of Nortel benefited Huawei in a couple of ways. The potential for those hacks of key information over a decade to be handed directly to Huawei, but also it allowed them to go in and scoop up engineers. As many as 20 top engineers moved over from Nortel to Huawei at the end, including the guy who holds the record for patents at Nortel, hundreds of patents.
Wow. Former NDP Ontario Premier Bob Rae got another appointment, this time as Canada's ambassador to the United States. Brian, were some in Ottawa a little surprised by this announcement?
I doubt many were, and I wasn't, although I feel like I was the only one maybe criticizing the fact that Bob Rae got this appointment. Look, I've covered Bob Rae for a long time. He's a very smart man. He's a very thoughtful man. I have a lot of good things to say about him, but I also know his record. And here in Ontario, where he was premier from 1990 to 1995, he was a disaster. And despite the fact that voters rejected him at the end and his government had such a horrible record, he just racks up appointment after appointment. Advise the government on this, advise the government on that. Well, now he gets to go and do a job that he's probably dreamed of since he was a little boy, be Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, or maybe not a little boy. By the time his father got the job, his father was a career diplomat for Canada. By the time his father got to the UN for Pierre Trudeau in 1972, I believe it was, Bob was a fully grown man. In fact, he was about to enter federal politics the first time as a New Democrat MP, who eventually brought down Joe Clark's government with a non-confidence motion in 1979.
Would this maybe help Canada in the future get that UN Security Council seat?
I think we'd be wise not to run for it in the future. The latest Trudeau move, of course, after much criticism of Stephen Harper's failure to get it, Canada got fewer votes than Harper did back in 2010. Let's just leave it alone for a while.
Political journalist with the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilley, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.